I'm glad you can make it. We were delayed a little bit because the weather out there is really, really nasty. So I want to thank everyone for making it here. Welcome to Disability and Higher Education, a roundtable forum. Thank you to everyone in the room today and to those who are tuning in online. I want to give a big shout out to the Human Rights Institute and the Office of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion at Kean University for its partnership in making this event come to light. And a special thank you to the organizers of today's event, my executive director, Sarah Mack. Give her a big hand. She wrote this introduction, by the way. No, she didn't. I'm only joking. My policy and advocacy director, Brittany Macaluso. Where's Brittany? Is she in the room? She's organizing things, but thank you. And Mindy Goldstein, our graduate assistant with the Human Rights Institute. Mindy? Where's Mindy? She's back. Oh, there's Brittany. Mindy's back there. And Chevron Williams, our student intern with the Human Rights Institute. Let's give everybody a big hand who helped out on this. Thank you. We're going to follow an audio description format this evening. Therefore, I ask that you provide a brief visual description of yourself before you speak for the first time. I'm Ray Lesniak, former New Jersey Senator and President of the Lesniak Institute. I'm a 76-year-old white guy, 6 feet tall, and 215 pounds of solid muscle. I am wearing a blue shirt and a sports jacket. I have gray hair, which just turned gray when I couldn't get to my hairdresser during the COVID shutdown. I kept it gray after I did a poll on Facebook with my brown hair that I had before when I went to my hairdresser and the gray hair. It was 75-0, keep the gray. So I'm gray. I am so proud to be standing in front of such an esteemed group of panelists who tirelessly work towards advancing disability rights. Today's event will make us better advocates in making our institutions of higher education more accessible. We have made advancements due to people like you who raised their voices and demanded change for those in power. We must continue to advocate fiercely to improve access to higher education for everyone. We will continue our conversation after tonight's event by establishing the Disability and Higher Education Network, which will work continuously long-term to carry this movement forward. Our first speaker, who will be joining us virtually, is Tamika Quick, Executive Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Kean University. Tamika is a first-generation college student born in Harlem, New York City, and raised in Passaic, New Jersey. Over the course of the last 16 years, Tamika's expertise has involved student activities, fraternity, and sorority life, the women's empowerment movement, and diversity education. In her current role as DEI, Tamika is leading the Kean University Disability Task Force, which meets bi-weekly to discuss how the campus can improve its accessibility services. And by the way, at this point in time, off message, I want to commend our president, Lamont Rappaport, for his commitment to diversity in education for everyone. We're also happy to announce that Tamika's office, in partnership with the Office of Accessibility Services and the Human Rights Institute, will form the Higher Education Network, which will work long-term to improve accessibility in all places of higher education in the state of New Jersey. Tamika, the floor is yours. Give her a big hand.
Can't hear you.
Hello? Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Okay. You hear me
Um,
okay, Hillary?
I can, yes.
Okay. I would like
Can't
to,
hear you yet. Hold on. Technical
okay.
difficulties, people. Sure. Tamika, could you try one more time?
Sure. Good evening, everyone.
Tamika, we'll come right back to you as soon as we figure this out.
Okay, no
Yeah, we
problem.
have Tamika. We'll figure you out. Meanwhile, we have Gene, an incredible advocate for disability and access to higher education. Gene, it's all yours.
Thank you. In the pamphlet for tonight, it said 19% of undergraduates report having a disability. But advocates say that number is low because not everyone registers with the Office of Disability. Not everybody puts that on their college application, so the number is definitely higher than that. The pandemic has challenged students in a number of ways. Tests show scores lagging across the board. High school students who don't have as much time to make up lost ground could be facing the biggest setbacks. How does disability further stack the odds against students? More than ever, students and their families need to be proactive when it comes to choosing a college which most likely wasn't designed with them in mind. How prepared are mental health services? How helpful are disability services? What kinds of communities are available to students? These are just some of the questions students with disabilities have to consider before heading off to college. What is being done at the college level to mitigate the academic, social, psychological, and educational setbacks? There are some huge differences between K through 12 districts and how colleges handle disability. For instance, an IEP doesn't apply in college. Anyone heading to a school expecting to have the same accommodations listed in an IEP will be in for a surprise. Colleges will make a number of accommodations. They will allow a student to have someone take notes for them. They will remove physical barriers, but they won't modify coursework, as local schools would have. A podcaster summed it up this way: K through 12 schools aim for success. Colleges address accessibility. Students are more often on their own in college. If someone doesn't register with disability services at the start, and they let time go by before realizing they need help with note-taking, there's nothing that can be done about bad grades that have already been given. For this reason, advocates say students with disabilities should head to their school's disability services right away. In fact, they should check out the office before choosing a school, because they weren't all created equally. And since the end goal for college students is employment, prospective students should also look at a school's career services department, as many won't have the resources to help students with disabilities. In between the bookends of registering at the DEI office or career services as you get ready for the rest of life, there is the there's student life, there's life at college, and what will that be like? Students don't want to always have to fight to get accommodations. And sometimes you just want to be a student and enjoy college life. What will make that possible is if they are prepared across the board in all of these different areas. And if students see that, they will feel welcome. I'm just looking to see if I had any other note here I wanted to get. I also just wanted to point out, and this is a little bit out of order here, but as far as that student life, only 15 schools across the country offer competitive adaptive sports. I'll end there.
Well, thank you, Gene. And by the way, I did not give him an introduction that he well deserves. Paving the way as the first and only disability beat reporter in the state, Gene Myers covers disability and mental health for Gannett newspapers and sites across the country, including The Record, North Jersey, and USA Today. He has been with NorthJersey.com since 2004. You don't look that old, Gene. Where he has worked as a features editor, social media editor, magazine editor, newspaper section editor, and syndicated columnist. He does great work and obviously continues to do great work to bring the message across to the general population of the needs of the disability community. Let's give Gene a big hand. And how about our technical people? Are we ready for Tamika? Yes or no?
You know, I forgot.
yet?
I didn't describe myself when I started. I'm actually 50, so I am that old. I'm about 5'7".
Good point. I missed that. And so
I'm
did you.
Yeah. And I'm wearing a green sweater with kind of blonde and brown hair.
Okay. And that's Gene. I'm 26 years older, a foot taller, and weigh a hell of a lot heavier. I'm working on that, though. All right, Sarah, what are we doing now?
Yeah, so let's move to our open discussion while we work out the technical difficulties behind us. I have been informed that, Tamika, you have to go at 6:30, so we'll do our best to try to get you up here. But in the meantime, let's go right to our open discussion. And again, thank you so much for being here, Tamika. I'm sorry that we're not able to get the audio yet. So Jean has asked me to give some introductions to our panelists here, which I'm very happy to do. So before I start, my name is Sarah. I am the Executive Director of the Lesniak Institute for American Leadership. I am 5'4", I'm blonde, and I'm a white woman. I'm also very, very humbled to be here having this conversation with all of you. From the beginning, when the Human Rights Institute invited us here to have this conversation and to host this conversation, I was very taken aback because disability rights is not an area that I'm very familiar with. So it has been quite the learning experience for me being able to dive into this world. And I feel so humbled sitting around such intelligent people who are such experts in this field. So without further ado, let me go through some bios, and then Jean will bring us right into the open discussion. So first, to my left is Javier Robles. Javier Robles has received numerous awards and recognitions for his involvement within the community, including Minorities with Disabilities Advocacy Award, the Seton Hall University Ramon Ramos Medal of Courage, the Committee Noviembre Award, among so many others. Javier serves as a faculty member and a professor in the Kinesiology and Health Department over at Rutgers, and also he's co-chair of the university's Disability Studies Committee. He is the director of the Center for Disability Sports, Health Wellness at the university, and in my opinion, something very, very cool about him is he's the founder and chair of this new organization called New Jersey Disabilities COVID-19 Action Committee, which has stepped up to the plate and filled a very important role during the COVID-19 pandemic. He's the founder of a Facebook group, Peoples with Disabilities, helping each other survive the coronavirus. And until 2010, he served as the deputy director of the New Jersey Division of Disability Studies. So thank you, Javier, for being here.
So, first question for you. Why did you start the Disability Action Committee?
Well, thank you. Oh, you have to get closer for Gene. All right. Technology. All right. Try not
There we go.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, first of all, Millie, one of our COVID-19 members, is here with us, Millie Gonzalez. So why did we start the COVID-19 committee? Because initially when the pandemic started, what we saw was that there was a huge lack of representation of people with disabilities who are often marginalized and often forgotten during these pandemics. So a bunch of people, including myself and parents and lots of individuals with disabilities, as well as statewide organizations and nonprofits, decided to come together and, basically document what was happening. So we came up with a report that, we eventually released to the lawmakers and the governor's office. Am I going too fast? I'm sorry. So we eventually released to the governor's office, and we're fortunate enough to have lawmakers work with us on some of the things we saw, including people with disabilities not being treated, people with disabilities being discriminated against, in hospitals as an example, as well as a number of state and local programs. So that's why we started. That's why we eventually developed the report, and I've been fortunate enough to work with some great people on that committee.
And you've taken the COVID-19 part out of the name now, so you continue on.
Yeah, so what we found was that these issues are structural, systemic issues that have been existing with our community in New Jersey, but nationally as well. And these issues aren't going away. Just because just because we think COVID is gone, which it's not, doesn't mean that the issues of systemic inequality as it comes to people with disabilities are done. And this applies whether you're in college, whether you're trying to get a job, whether you're getting housing. All of these issues are issues that we saw as a committee that, we could change our name, get rid of the COVID-19, but these issues are going to be with us. So, some of the legislation that we have currently at the state level really begins to address some of these issues. And one of the things that we've called for, and we talk to legislative individuals all the time, is that, if people with disabilities are not at the table, so we thank you for inviting us to this, then why are people making decisions about what happens to us? We wouldn't do that to any other group, right? We wouldn't do that to women. We wouldn't do that to other marginalized communities. So people with disabilities really need to be represented across the board at every state department, and they need to be in charge of their own lives. And what we saw in COVID is that because we were not there yet, a lot of people died. People with intellectual, developmental disabilities suffered the largest amount of casualties in terms of COVID, but so did people of color, including people with disabilities of color.
One of the great things about your committee was you had people from different disabilities, different communities, whether it was mobility or hearing or vision. You brought everybody together, and it was these issues. First of all, it was COVID at first, that it was so important for everyone to come together and have a voice. I think before COVID, all of the voices were splintered. We all had different, mobility needs are different than vision or whatever it is. And so you managed to pull everybody together and have a big impact on visibility. do you think that the disability community, if there is an overarching disability community, will stay together in that way in the future?
Yeah, I mean, Millie knows, she's been at this, she's been part of the committee. When we first got together, I looked around the room and we had parents, we had people, you know, there's this whole, like, people who support institutions, people who don't support institutions, you know, in the disability community, and they would never see eye to eye. And we had all these people across the table, and I was like, this is probably never gonna work. Like, you know, we'll just have this meeting, probably another meeting, and this thing will be done. But one of the things that I believe that all of us got it, whether, you know, let's just say the institution issue, which is whether you support developmental centers at the state level or you support community living, you know, that could have been a splinter issue for us. But at the end of the day, what we came to realize as members of that committee is that there really cannot be this, you know, silos, like you say, if we want to move forward as a community. You know, the reason why that issue is important to all of us is because we came to realize that you cannot close down developmental disability centers. And obviously that's controversial, right? And before joining this committee and working with these people, I wouldn't have said that. But I would be happy to say that if you, the state of New Jersey, provides community services, including housing, personal care assistance, transportation, to those people that you're going to close out and put them in the community, that's unrealistic. You know, and we came to realize that as a committee of advocates. But, you know, that's just one issue. You know, we can't afford to, you know, any longer, especially after what we saw at COVID, you know, continue to be splintered. You know, people who are blind, people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, at the end of the day, all want to just be, you know, humans. They want to have the same opportunities to go to school, to go to, you know, get a job, to be part of the community. That's not hard. You know, it's not hard for other groups, so it shouldn't be hard for us.
And welcome to the world of politics.
Oh,
And you're doing a wonderful job. Give Javier a wonderful round. Gene, who do we have next?
So next on our panel, we have Jerissa. Jerissa is the has served the disability community for over 15 years through the ARC. Jerissa is currently the Director of Planning for Adult Life Programs. The program is a statewide project that's funded by the New Jersey Division of Developmental Disabilities to assist young adults between the ages of 16 and 21 with developmental disabilities and their families in charting a life course for adulthood, including post-secondary education, employment, housing, legal, financial planning, entitlement programs, eligibility, self-direction, health, behavioral health, building and maintaining community ties and friendships, and planning and visioning a life course. So thank you, Jerissa, for being here with us. I believe that Jean has a question for you to start us off.
Thank you.
Jerissa, describe yourself.
About to. Thank you. I am a African American female wearing a beige sweater over a black shirt with blonde and brown hair.
That's the same thing I said. So, okay, so the first question, working on adult life programs at the ARC, what are the biggest post-secondary education barriers you see in your population?
Sure. So it's twofold. The first is the possibility of individuals even envisioning that college is an option for them. So you're dealing with parents that may not, or at their child's birth, were given disparaging messages about their child's abilities in order to even envision their child accessing higher education is something that is new and very scary to them. Schools on that side is also a piece of that, of knowing what programs that are available. There's over 250 different programs just for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities throughout the nation. And then the other part of that is universities seeing this as a realistic and viable option to offer to individuals with disabilities, meaning that their programs need to be inclusive, universal accommodations, different things like that. And even though every university is required to have an Office of Disability Services, the problem is that there is no standard of delivery of all the services that are being offered. So the school really is shooting from the hip, if you don't mind me saying, as far as what services they're going to actually provide to those students once they are accessed or they access higher education.
And as I was saying in the beginning, from my reading, it's very different what you would get in your local schools district versus college.
Definitely, definitely. High school is an environment where individuals have went to school to learn how to teach a subject. When you enter into a college setting, it is an environment in which the professors are experts in their field, but not necessarily in the skills of teaching. And so because of that, a lot of professors, a lot of schools aren't used to the accommodations that an individual with a disability would need. And so I applaud every DEI department that tries to make those things more accessible to those students so that they will understand and can make those adjustments for the individuals. It's, as you mentioned in your opener, the IEP or the individual education program is not in higher education. So there are modifications or 504 plans that individuals might be more familiar with. So as a part of those accommodations, the schools need to take a look and provide those opportunities for those students.
Schools, I imagine, are pretty good with physical access. What do they seem, no, maybe not by the way you're looking, but what do they seem like they're lacking most when it comes to helping students with disabilities?
I think that, again, the universal design is always a good pattern for a lot of individuals that will access higher education. As far as programming is concerned, I feel like there's opportunities to build capacity. A lot of the universities that students do access that have disabilities are competitive programs. They're students that are competing for 6 to 12 spots in these special programs. So building capacity is definitely an opportunity for growth and for individuals. As far as accommodations with the curriculum, I understand that schools are obligated to maintain a standard of education. However, the supports that are come alongside those programs often are in addition to the tuition. So if there's a school that offers a program that will come alongside a student, they will then have an additional fee to pay in order to receive the different accommodations that a true 504 plan or accommodation plan would require them to be able to meet the standards of learning that the university has. So as a part of that, an individual will either have to pay more or suffer in success, will have to sit on the couch and wait for acceptance into those additional programs, or they will have to, again, suffer in silence. So providing those opportunities at an equal level is where I think is a great starting place.
There's a lot of sitting in silence and waiting, right, in the community. Is there something that people at the table could do to help this?
So how long do we have?
I think they'll get to my cane pretty quickly, but
sure. I think that, again, building capacity, offering the Office of Disability Services opportunities to build their wraparound services. I think a great opportunity for growth would be in the student activities as well, creating student organizations that encompass individuals with disabilities. Representation is very important, so when students with disabilities see themselves participating in higher education forums and different activities, then they'll be more apt to join. Also with this, I believe that providing those accommodations that even though the school doesn't have a standard of delivery, they still can provide there's an opportunity for individuals to expand the services that they actually do provide to students, so that students will feel as though that they can be in a higher education environment and be a contributing member to the campus.
And welcome there, yes. Does that mean now that we have our next person virtually, Sarah?
We are still trying to figure it out. I actually have an idea that AVT could listen to. If we join on Brittany's phone, the Zoom call, and put her on mute, would that work with the audio? Hillary, could you try testing your audio for us, please?
Hi.
Oh, we hear you. Wonderful. This is great. Okay, so let me introduce Hillary for you guys. As a founding partner of Freeman Law Offices and Special Needs Attorneys, Hillary Freeman has experience representing clients in special education and Section 504 issues, which Drissa has just mentioned, including accommodations on high-stakes testing and graduate school admission tests, guardianship matters, estate planning, adult services. As a sister of a man with autism and a national speaker in special education matters, she is able to combine her personal experience with her legal training to help families advocate for services and support. Hillary holds a JD from Widener University School of Law and practices both in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Welcome, Hillary. And I don't mean to take your job from Eugene, but I think Drissa mentioned some really amazing things just now. Would you mind starting off by reacting to some of the things that Drissa has said? Specifically with the 504, I was very interested in that.
I was just wanting to applaud her for everything that came out of her mouth. She was just wonderful. Specifically with 504, I think that I agree. I think students with disabilities are having a lot of challenges accessing the schools from a social and emotional standpoint. 504 is about equal access, and it's just, to implement it is very challenging because you don't have the professionals who really specialize in the areas. But to kind of piggyback off of what she said with respect to more of how they're navigating the college campus, she didn't say it in those words, but I think that's a pretty big issue to bring up. They have challenges with respect to accessing the class in terms of implementing accommodations, but I see a lot of challenges in the dorm and the campus life. Keep in mind, people don't come to me because everything is going well. They always come to me because there are challenges. So I'm coming from that perspective, but they have difficulty from a social perspective, and sometimes knowing the right things to say, knowing who they can be friends with and what the appropriate thing to say to those students. I have a very large clientele of the students with autism, and they often go to college. And they're not necessarily getting all of the support in the high school through their IEP, so they're not necessarily fully prepared to go to college, and that creates some challenges because they don't know how to navigate the college campus. Their anxiety goes up. They don't know how to live independently, and there aren't a lot of supports in place to check in on them or make sure that they're being able to implement any strategies that they've learned on the college campus and generalizing those skills there.
Can you tell us what are some of the biggest obstacles some of your clients have faced?
Not so life skills. I would say with respect to laundry, that is overwhelming for a lot of students. But I think there was some of the biggest obstacle. I had one client, for example, who was really had he's an individual with autism, and he really liked shoes. And there was another student who wore really nice shoes on the college campus and around anywhere, and he followed her all around the campus because he really liked her shoes. He then got suspended and he was put on probation because he was accused of stalking, and that's a violation of the code of conduct. But I worked with the attorney to explain autism, and a lot of the staff don't really understand autism and sometimes how that impacts the students. So, and explained that he wasn't stalking her, he was stalking her shoes. And we had to work together to come up with supports to put in place to get him on the college back into school. So I guess to answer your question in more detail, I think that the biggest challenge is that what other panelists have said, that the staff on the college campus have a difficult time understanding the needs of the students with the disabilities. Unless it's outlined for them step by step, and that's going to vary per student.
What wins have occurred in your work?
I consider anytime I don't necessarily consider court wins. I mean, there are wins, but I don't always limit my wins to that. But I would say from a court perspective, accommodations on the standardized assessments like architecture registration exam, the LSATs, GREs, SATs. So I've been able to get accommodations there so people can get into college. But I would say I'm most proud of helping these students, get services for with respect to their social skills and life skills.
How can people at this table help? What would you like to see done next?
That's a great question. So you heard before that there are, for those of you who don't know, a lot of the colleges have transition programs to help high school students transition into college and learn skills on the college campus, which is it should be part of their IEP. What I think people at the table can really do is explain how those transition services are helping the students be prepared for post-secondary employment and independent living, but explain it to the school districts. Because I'm finding, these programs are fantastic, where the students can go on to live on campus or go on campus as part of their day to learn skills on the campus and get the specialized instruction that they need from the school district. But the school districts don't like paying for programs on a college campus. They just put their foot down when they say they're not paying for a college program. So I think it would be really helpful to help to students with disabilities, for the colleges to work together and collaborate with the high schools to show how that's going to benefit them on the college campus.
Thank you. I see that as maybe a couple of articles we could work on.
That would be great. Thanks.
So our next panelist that we have here, last of course but not least, is Professor Anne-Marie Bacino, a representative from Kane University. So Professor Bacino is the first full-time deaf professor at Kane University, and she's the advisor to Kane's new ASL club. Based in the College of Health Professions and Human Services and the School of Communication Disorders and Deafness, Professor Bacino's students are learning American Sign Language in an immersive voice-off setting where students pick up the language naturally.
So, first question for you. What inspired you to start the ASL Club?
Okay, before I became a full-time professor, Okay, before I became a full-time professor, I had a lot of experience in mental health as a counselor for the deaf and hard of hearing, and this was in Philadelphia. I would say about 6 years of experience. And so I had a lot of empathy, and there was also those that had other disabilities besides being deaf. After that experience, I did go back to graduate school, and I became an ASL professor. And the first day of class, I have to describe this experience. All the students thought that I was a hearing professor because I was very quiet, that I was just in the front, and they had a little bit of anxiety, and I announced that I was deaf, and they were shocked. And I got to remind them that English is not my first language, it's my second language. So I'm bilingual growing up. Also, my parents are also deaf. So I'm born into a deaf family. And so I told the students that we're not going to be using our voices, that I'm going to be writing on the board. They have to have a lot of patience. ASL is their first language. And then the students are a little bit flustered. And then I did speak to the disability services. I know it has a different title. They did send me some accommodations for each student because it was a big challenge. I also have a disability myself, so I did my best writing notes a lot of times to students. I didn't have any interpreters in the classroom. I didn't want any in ASL 1. I wanted that immersive experience. And then if they're out in the real world, there's not going to be an interpreter there. So how are you going to interact with a deaf or hard of hearing person? So I really wanted to have that impact on them. And then after that, throughout the semester, the students really enjoyed the class. They really loved it. I challenged them to work within the deaf and hard of hearing community, understand their struggles, their oppressions, autism, it's a real thing, to be discriminated by the hearing world. And they didn't really understand exactly what a deaf or hard of hearing, their experiences are or their emotions because of all these barriers to communication access. And then I told them that it's important to understand and learn ASL so that they could be partners for providing that access. They could get involved in speech or special education as a teacher. Now, if they met a person that's deaf or hard of hearing, now they would also understand maybe other laws that's related to the ADA or Section 504, which was mentioned tonight. And some hearing students also want to become vocational rehab counselors to assist in employment and schooling, education, housing, things of that nature. And then I established the ASL club as well. And that was just to force the students again to get involved in the community with deaf events. And we mostly have them in New Jersey, and that's a great opportunity to get involved. And then in the past spring, we also had a great event. We had 3 panelists come to the campus, and they all have their own journeys within deafhood. Some are raised to be oral, some have the cochlear implant, the surgery, and some didn't have any language exposure or access. And then everybody came from a different perspective of hearing loss, and it was just great for everybody to exchange their experiences. So that's what I really want to expose the students to, that there's such a spectrum of deaf people. It's just not one experience. It's not one size fits all. So it's just important to educate, to provide that awareness that there's different degrees of hearing loss that could be mild to severe. Some that do use a hearing aid or a cochlear implant, some that are comfortable being deaf. And then the same thing with interacting with law enforcement or going to the hospital or the judicial system, just understanding how one gets an interpreter and the reasons behind it. So there's so much education, so much awareness that we need to keep fostering.
Can you walk us through your voice off class and how that goes?
Okay, so with the voice off class, so when you're learning ASL, especially part 1, a lot of students, as I mentioned, they're a little bit shocked and flustered. So just imagine me in front of the room and just signing, and there's no interpreter there. Now, with American Sign Language, it's a very rich and beautiful language. If you compare it to English, it's completely different. It's a visual language. So if you use voice, you're not going to be able to learn. And so ASL has its own syntax, its own grammar, its own structure, as well as English and other spoken languages. And some people think that ASL is a broken language. It is not. Broken English, and it is not. And so the history of ASL has about 300 years or less of history, and it's actually borrowed from the French Sign Language, which has a lot of influences. A lot of people think that it's related to British Sign Language, which is completely different. It is not related to English. It's actually related to French. In the 1800s, there was a person, Thomas Gallaudet, who brought it from Europe and established some schools. Now, again, that's the reason why we don't use any voice in the classroom. Now, we're setting up the dynamics that ASL is inferior to English. We don't want to set up that dynamics. It's equivalent. And then also ASL is a beautiful language. It's very expressive. And some students, I got to say, I do have some counseling experience again, so I understand where the students are coming from. I do have that vocational rehab experience, so I try to interact with the students, and they're very expressive because ASL is very nice for them to express their emotions, their feelings, as opposed to spoken English, which might be limited on body language. And then those that are disabled, they just feel like, wow, how can I accommodate? How can I ask for accommodation? And I just relate to them that I do have a similar experience being disabled. And then we can provide advice to each other. I know I'm in the role as a professor, but I do have that experience as a guidance counselor, and I do have a lot of empathy skills. And so I do relate to my students. I do teach on the ASL 1 through the 4th level. And then this past August, I became the program coordinator for the entire program at last. And then also this semester, I'm teaching Deaf in Society. There's 2 parts. And then in the U.S., it's not, in the U.S., there's not a lot of deaf professors. And the reason for that, there's a lot of struggles because those that are deaf, they use ASL and they're not proficient in English. So to be on the university level, there's a lot of oppression, and a lot of deaf educators don't follow through with their masters, maybe just getting their bachelor's. And so they don't have access as their hearing peers that don't have disabilities. So many do get fed up, and they just get their bachelor's degrees. And it's really challenging to pick up English as a second language and then to continue with their master's or their PhD. And so a lot of students are shocked that, oh, there's a deaf professor here with her master's? Wow.
This last question is one that Sarah wrote for everybody. How can our partners at this table help you?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. At Kane University, they have done an amazing job. I commend them. They've been a great partner, especially with human resources. They provide me any accommodations. I'm the first full-time professor here, and they mentioned that if I needed interpreting services, and they provided that, and they did a great job with accommodations. Now, sometimes there might be a last-minute meeting taking place, or maybe a emergency department meeting, and it's really hard to find somebody at last minute in terms of interpreting services. So those are some of the barriers. So that puts the burden on me, and so a lot of times I need to make that request to HR. Please, I need interpreting services. We need to make these accommodations in advance. And I know interpreters can't be here all day because that would be an undue hardship, especially under the ADA. You can't have a full-time interpreter. So I understand the financial implications of it and the expense on the university. Now, if a student needs to meet with me one-on-one, sometimes I do go back to writing notes, or maybe we use a voice recognition app. And then if somebody talks very fast, I got to tell them to slow down, just so that I can keep up with these apps. And usually that's how we exchange information. So that's some of the challenges that I do face. And then I do have a video phone that's provided in my office, and that's provided by the FCC. That's under Title IV, and so that relates to relay services. And so I call a call center for an interpreter, and I'm signing in American Sign Language to the interpreter, and then they make calls for me on my behalf. And then with COVID, I was very lucky and fortunate that I had my iPad and I can set that up and I already had the number linked up. But sometimes it's a little bit challenging just with line of sight. So those are some of my experiences. And then sometimes it's very challenging, again, meeting with students one-on-one, and it's extra work for me. But other than that, everything's been great on the university level. You see there's 3 interpreters tonight, and they knew I was coming tonight, the staff, so they did an amazing job with all the accommodations.
Do you think we should go to questions now?
Yeah, I was actually thinking the same thing. So we've got a couple that have come in on our live stream that I'd love to read. Okay, so the first is from Carolyn Corbrand from Facebook. She asks, disability discrimination still seems to be openly accepted in many areas where we have made more progress in other minority groups. I think increasing disability studies programs is key to increasing the conversation for more people to become educated and sensitive to these issues that our students face. However, these programs are not widely offered. Would there be any grants or special programs possible, even though throughout New Jersey, to increase the availability of these programs? Drizza, would you happen to be able to answer this?
Well, I can address that there is a program through the ARC of New Jersey called the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project, and they have worked with several schools to be accessible to students, both medical professionals or those students that are going into the medical field, the social work field, in which they have actual self-advocates that will come and talk to them, will work with them to give them a realistic idea of what it is to work with an individual with a disability. And so there are several schools that are trying to do that to increase knowledge, a realistic opportunity to work with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but there's also room for more for that to take place.
Can I think Javier also wanted to respond to that one.
Thank you, Gene. Well, as someone who's been trying to get a disability studies minor at Rutgers University for the last 3.5 years, doesn't seem like it would take that long when we started, but it has. You know, I've seen a lot of what a university could actually do if they step up. And, you know, I'm always troubled, you know, and I think this is a great question because I'm always troubled when someone believes that you have to like find funding through charity for equitable programs. We shouldn't have to like at a university level seek charity funding to have disability studies minors or majors. We should expect all universities, especially in the state of New Jersey, to have those. And you know, one of the things that I point out in my department specifically, and you know, I don't really have an issue with saying this, is that, you know, at the Department of Kinesiology, the majority of the people who are going to graduate from our department are going to be going into OT, PT, they're going to be medical doctors, they're going to be PAs. All these people are going to work with people with disabilities, yet we don't offer courses other than the ones that I teach and one other person teaches in our department to prepare students for those. We should be thinking of this systemically and equitably and universally for all students. We should want our students in New Jersey who have disabilities and who don't have disabilities prepared to work in the disability community, prepared to work with people with disabilities. So, you know, one of the questions is what can we do? You know, the state of New Jersey, I think, can look at this issue and say, you know, what aren't we doing? And why do these universities always have to think that, you know, let's find some charity funding? You know, people with disabilities, you know, are tired of being charity cases. You know, we shouldn't have to, like, you know, claw for every penny we get when other groups don't have to do that. And I think that's, you know, that's unfortunate. And what we saw during COVID is that it's not just unfortunate, it's systemic and it's long-standing, and we have to get rid of it. We have to, like, change our mentality.
I'd like to mention that if anyone in this room has a question, you could just put your microphone up like this. We have a walking mic that we can take around to you, or if you're at the table, you know, you could talk right into your microphone. So, Hillary, for you on Zoom, you can use the raise hand feature, or if you'd like to just give me a hand signal, I can see you. So our next question comes in from Facebook. Jean Perkins says, how can the College of Education add to the existing curriculum for better service to emerging professionals? I'll leave this open-ended to anyone who wants to take a stab. I can read it again. It's about the College of Education. How can they add to their existing curriculum for better service to emerging professionals?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. So the College of Education, I believe that during the students' practicums and different things allow them to be in the actual classroom. With special education, the same thing. I think that incorporating access to individuals with disabilities perhaps earlier in their programs would be beneficial for the students, and have it as a part of, I remember during my freshman psychology class, we were all lab rats, and sorry for all of those psychology majors, but we were all lab rats. We were required as a part of our class to participate in experiments that were done by the School of Psychology. So I would say that creating some type of element of immersive education in the curriculum, in the requirements of the class that would work with people with disabilities would be beneficial.
Now with my ASL class, there's 2 students that were deaf, actually, and they didn't disclose this. They have the cochlear implant growing up. And I asked them if they had any accommodations, and they said no. So I just wanted to make sure if anybody was deaf or hard of hearing, but some do not disclose this because of being discriminated or maybe being judged by society. And so they can't pick up on loud sounds in the background, but they can pick up on most speech. But if there's a lot of environmental noise, they can't hear. So it doesn't mean that they can hear 100%. And so it is a challenge for them to pick up on sound. And then especially if the student is observing the teacher and the teacher is writing on the board and speaking at the same time without making that eye contact. And now deaf and hard of hearing students, maybe they won't disclose if they have the implant. Maybe they don't identify as being deaf or hard of hearing. Maybe they identify as being hearing or hard of hearing. And so that's another thing to be mindful of. Those that are on the college level that want to become teachers, there's different device tools that are assistive equipment. And sometimes some students don't want to disclose out of fear or how they identify. And so those are implications for the future that I've been seeing in my own classroom.
Thank you. I actually have a question myself. While we were putting this event together and talking through how this event is more than just one day at this one place, the conversation is here, it starts, and then it ends, and we go home and we forget about everything. We want to make it something more to make sure that we're carrying this movement forward. And engaging with the Human Rights Institute through their conference that they're putting on, and all of the various events that the ASL is engaged in as well. We've been talking about what is the most meaningful impact we can have and how do we make this happen. So we came up with this idea that we're going to put together a disability and higher education network to specifically tackle ideas within this area. So we put together some basic structures, and we really hope that all of you are going to be involved moving forward. But my question to every single one of you, maybe we can go around, is what do you think our priority needs to be? Where is the area that we need to focus on the most to improve our spaces of higher education for those living with disabilities?
Thank you. Big question. I think first we need to start at elementary school, right? We need to take that into middle school, then we need to take that into high school. When we have people who go into college, let's say who may be on the spectrum, and they haven't had any life skills programs in their high school, they haven't had any life skills programs in their middle school, and we're not paying for those types of services, but we expect these students to perform just like everybody else when we know what we're putting them up against. College is not a place that you're going to go and someone's going to hold your hand, right? As a professor, I know that. When my students come to me, I expect the same thing of every student that comes up to me as I do, of every other student. So, we need to first start there. And then when we get to college, we really need to invest in these programs. We need to invest in disability studies programs. We need to invest in making sure that our students, and I think someone else has said this, are part of clubs. It doesn't always have to be disability. A person with a disability doesn't always want to be in a disability thing, right? Sometimes they want to go skiing. Sometimes they want to join the study abroad program. We need to make sure that those programs are accessible to them, and more importantly, are affordable to them. As we know, people with disabilities in this country are among the most poor in terms of economics. They're least likely to graduate from high school or college. So those people that actually do make it to college, we should invest in them, and we should make it, something that's not like, hey, we're going to do this for you. It should be part of our program. So.
If I may, let me say what I learned tonight as the most significant thing that we can do moving forward, and that is to build awareness. Just awareness of what folks are going through that we don't know about, that I did not know about. And I consider myself pretty open-minded and experienced, and yet I learned so much tonight. So I want to thank you all for coming, and this is just the beginning, right, Sarah? Go ahead.
Well, I'd like to pose this question to everyone here. It really is on my mind, and I really want to get the most out of this conversation. So I would direct my question to you, Professor Bashino, and then Jerissa, and then to Hillary. What should our priorities be?
Are we talking about priorities at higher education?
Yes, specifically within spaces of higher education for those living with disabilities.
Let's see. I have a lot of thoughts about that, especially with my own experiences. I got to make sure that all on the staff level, they know how to interact with somebody that's disabled, and they don't treat anybody as being different, that they're not looking down upon them, making sure that they feel included, having interactions and communication, smiling, greeting them. Even those from another department. If you see somebody that's in a wheelchair, maybe they need some assistance, just to make sure that somebody feels included, that they can participate. I really don't like that feeling where those that are disabled, that they're not included, or there's silos that we talked about earlier. And I just want somebody to treat me the same as you're treating your peers that don't have a disability. And just treat each other as humans without any judgments. That's the key.
Thank you. Just I ask you the same. What should our priority be for this disability and higher education network? Where should we focus first?
Sorry, I pushed it. I agree with Professor Bacino regarding all staff being able to participate, perhaps even in a sensitivity training regarding people with disabilities, to heighten their understanding, to allow them to learn about the different disability communities. We have several represented here on this panel, but there are several that are not. And even within those disabilities, there are different cultures that are available, that are existing. And so a sensitivity perhaps to the staff would be there. That would be my first priority. The second would be then representation. It is very important that people with disabilities see themselves, not just the physical disabilities, but the invisible disabilities. There are ways to communicate that individuals are representative on campuses, and to use that even in the marketing materials, even in the programming. Different things would be also a priority for me.
Thank you. I know we have one more question over here, but I do want to ask Hillary before we go to the next question. Hillary, what would you say our priority needs to be in this disability and higher education network? Where do we start?
I would agree that awareness is key, but I would suggest having all staff go through not just sensitivity trainings, which I think is a great idea, but also bring in organizations that specialize in the various disabilities on a regular basis. And if you can, make it a requirement that staff go to attend these trainings so they become more knowledgeable about disabilities. You have Autism New Jersey, you have Parents of Autistic Children, you have Aspen for students with Asperger's, or what was formerly known as Asperger's. You have Learning Disabilities Association for students with learning disabilities and dyslexia. You have CHAD for students with ADD or ADHD. There are a lot of these organizations that really specialize in the various disabilities, and they know the challenges that students face more than anyone. So by bringing them in, maybe it will identify more issues that can then be targeted more efficiently.
If I can add to that, I would also say to, as I mentioned earlier, the student activities and or student organizations. Some of these national organizations would be glad to create chapters within the universities in order to bring them more onto the campus and to not only do these trainings, but also to have more awareness and representation on the campus.
Thank you. So, Siobhan, do you want to start with Priscilla back there with her question, and then we'll go around to everyone who has their mics up, and Kelly, I saw you too.
Hello, everyone. Oh, where's the button? Son. First of all, I want to say thank you for all of you, for this whole panel, for actually allowing every one of us to be here and expressing all the concerns. My name is Priscilla, and I've been involved in different leadership roles and organizations. I'm now part of the Union County Board of People with Disabilities. And one of the questions that I do have for everybody in the panel is, what challenges are still very existent in terms of the educational aspect? Because sometimes what happens is that there are people who come into different colleges and go to schools, and they want to be able to have that accessibility to the different activities and student life in general when it comes to being into the dorms. So what kind of policies should be implemented in order for the programs to be more accessible? Thank you.
I think Javier has something for that.
Thank you. Hi, Priscilla. How are you? Good seeing you again. I think what a lot of people have said already, right? It's about awareness, and not just awareness of the staff, but on behalf of the students, and the way we make students aware about disabilities generally is to include disabilities in the curriculum, include disabilities in clubs, like someone had said earlier. Make disabilities part of the fabric of any university. I know at Rutgers we're currently undergoing a master plan, and I've been on that committee, and one of the things that I keep pushing, other than Latino, of course, is disabilities, which is, we should have disabilities across the board. Just like everyone in this room could become disabled at any point, whether you come from one religion or race or whatever, that should be part of our university mantra. And once we have that, then I think when students with disabilities do go to colleges, they'll feel more welcome. They'll feel like they're in a place where they're safe, which is important. One of the things that I know we've talked about is statistics, and I know this is a big thing at Rutgers. I think we have 5,000 students with disabilities registered with the university with SAS right now. But we know, and this is, Jean opened with this, we know that the number is so much higher. But students with disabilities don't always, and I think Professor Bacino said this, don't always want to say I have a disability, right? Because there's a stigma attached with disability. And they feel that once they open that door, they're going to be seen as less than other students. And that shouldn't be the case. We really need to change that mindset. So, and I think if we do that, again, this is all systemic. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen if we have an awareness program tomorrow, right? We just have to keep doing it and doing it and doing it till it becomes part of just our everyday life.
Yes, so let's start with the questions around the table. Would you like to go first?
Thanks. Hi, my name is Jeffrey Paul. First of all, congratulations to everybody for pulling this together. Fabulous event, fabulous event. I just want to make an observation. What I see is, making things accessible and making accommodations for people in high school and college, that's the beginning of their journey. Once they get out of college, then they suffer tremendous job challenges, 75% unemployment for blind people. For deaf people, I don't know what it is. And those people who are working are underutilizing their skills that they have. And making accommodations and making these people productive and giving them the same access to digital information as everybody else has is not only important to them, it's important to our country. It's going to make all of us better. The really sharp companies realize that 20-25% of their audience can't hear them because they're not making their technology available for them. I'm the founder of a technology company based here in Union County, and we use artificial intelligence to make video and audio accessible for students and professionals. We're a young company. We have about a dozen customers. If there's anyone in this network that would like to try out our offer and become part of the solution, it would be my privilege to work with them. Best way to reach me is to email me at Jeff, Jeff, at ziotag.com, ziotag.com. Thank you for having me. Wonderful, wonderful event.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Would any of you like to respond to anything that he mentioned? So let's move on. Millie, I see you over there. You have your mic up. What's your question?
Thank you. This is Millie. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm a disabled Hispanic plus-size female wearing a black top, black pants, and sitting in a manual wheelchair. Thank you for this event today and for taking comments. I really just want to make a comment and kind of echo some of the things that have already been said. I think representation is absolutely critical. I think many of us adults with disabilities have not seen people like us in school, and I agree with Javier. Beginning in kindergarten, we haven't seen folks like us. And I think that that representation needs to grow in higher education. So that means, what do? We need to hire folks like us in higher education. And we need to bring in people with disabilities to talk about things other than disability. Let's bring them in. Let's bring in disabled scientists, mathematicians, scholars, writers, authors. Let's bring in folks who are disabled so that that representation goes beyond this is a person with a disability. No, this is an author who is disabled. Those are very different messages. So I think representation is something very important. I also think we need to model access. Professor Bacino mentioned the fact that there are interpreters in the room. We should notice when there are not interpreters in the room, not when there are interpreters in the room. So how do we model access as a network so that when it's missing, people are paying attention and asking where it is, right? I think also, ensuring that disability isn't trendy, isn't something that we're just focusing on right now until it's, until we can have an event like this, and like you said earlier, Sarah, move on from it and say that we did it. It can't end there, and it needs to go beyond awareness and conversation to action and meaningful results. So anyway, I can say lots more, but I think those kind of are some of the basic things. Creating a culture that really honors disability on college campuses from faculty and staff, giving folks with disabilities permission to disclose because it's a safe place to disclose. We cannot do that if at our core we are not doing that as an institution. So I think there's many things that we can do, but I think those are really basic. Thank you.
Yeah, Kelly.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Waters. I have blonde hair, red jacket, black top, and I wanted to thank everybody who spoke. The panel is excellent, and thank you, Senator, and the Lesniak Institute for putting this panel together. Without repeating everything that was said, I agree with almost everything, and I just wanted to make a few comments and then also throw out a thought for everybody. First of all, I think the biggest challenge right now, and I've heard about siloing, but then the disability community having to come together. And that's, so how do you reconcile the two? And then I believe Professor Robley said, you know, we're crawling, or, you know, for all of the finances. When I think about Union County, and I'm glad to see a business owner here, we have some of the largest corporations in this county, and we have a world-class institute here. That I think the investment from corporate America, mom and pop, whatever, they need to come and invest and see the people that are sitting at this table and hearing the people at this table, because the disability community is part of our workforce, and they're a very, very valuable part of our workforce because they want to work, and I have a brother who's disabled. He would give his right arm if he could get a job, okay, and I think that's very important. So you have the challenge of coming together when what I say is disability is not a tagline. That's something that I always say. And you have to respect the individual disabilities, but you also have to find a way to collaborate to then get the most bang for your buck. That's number one. The second thing I'd like everybody to consider, and I believe Professor Robley's also discussed it, about how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted the disability community, is I think that we as leaders in the disability community, friends of the disability community, have to help the disability community prepare for a natural disaster. If you have another Sandy, if you have another, and we have to bring together our government, our educational institutions, and our corporate citizens to be able to provide for our loved ones, friends, etc., that have disabilities, because they're the forgotten ones when all of a sudden is their apartment being flooded. So I would challenge everybody that through the education, through an institution like Kane, that you collaborate to bring together a database to identify those people who need emergency services, especially when you have a natural crisis. So thank you.
We can do something about that right now. Actually, we have a bill that is sitting at the State House on emergency preparedness. This is the second session that this bill has been up for a vote. So basically, we are asking the Office of Emergency Management to have a disability unit within the Office of Emergency Management. We're asking for 4 positions, 4 staff members, and those individuals would be in charge of making sure that, you know, people in the state of New Jersey know what to do in an emergency, that people in the state of New Jersey know, you know, organizations like independent living centers, the ARCs, and all these other organizations, that they know what to do. You know, right now, you know, if we had another pandemic or something else, we would be in the same place we were when this pandemic started, because, you know, no one has education. You know, we have ready.gov where people can register and so forth, and we have some registrations, but we don't have, you know, the infrastructure. You know, the state of New Jersey currently has a half-time contracted person who happens to be a person with a disability for the whole state of New Jersey. And they're expected to, like, plan these things out. They're expected to, like, get us ready for whatever the next horrible thing we can expect in the state of New Jersey is. You know, we have a bill. We just have to get it passed, and we have to get the governor to sign it, and we'll have at least a beginning.
Professor, now you're talking my language.
So we can expect you to push this bill?
Consider it done.
Thank you.
We're on it. The Lesniak Institute is on it.
All right. Thank you. You heard that, right, Millie?
Javier, maybe for the sake of the whole room, do you know the bill number offhand so that...
I'm looking at Millie because she knows I was going to look at her.
I'm working on it. 1 second. Sure.
It changed from last time, so I think it's S.
Sorry. This is Millie, and the good thing is that I have a list of legislative efforts to look through to find this that the Disability Action Committee has worked on. So I am. I'll get it. Yeah, I'll get it to you.
We'll get in touch with you, and we'll communicate, and we'll report back to everyone as well.
You can also read about that bill on northjersey.com.
Thank you, Jane.
So our next question, we'll go to Aiden.
Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Just for a visual description, my name is Aiden. I am wearing a blue suit with a black tie, and I am a white man. Okay. I wanted to just kind of comment on a couple of things as well as pose a question to really any one who would want to answer this. Briefly, I just wanted to just describe a little bit about myself because I think it relates to certain things that have been discussed tonight. I am a student at Kane University. I'm also a business owner. And the business that I operate deals with education advocacy. So some of the work that Hillary does, who spoke a little bit earlier, I do kind of the advocacy stuff before it gets to the point where people need to contact a lawyer for things that I'm not licensed or able to handle. Growing up, I have always lived with a disability and as well as really multiple disabilities. And I was in a situation where I was at a school where my rights were not met. The educational needs that myself as well as other students are entitled to were not being delivered. And I had to go through a process to obtain rights and to obtain the services that I need, which were not provided to by my school. I mentioned this because after I became a student at Kane as well as been working in the business for really a couple of years, I've had a lot of clients who are really struggling to go to college. They say to themselves, you know, how am I going to get to a place where I can have certain things that have been provided to me, sometimes by school, sometimes not, but services in a post-secondary environment, whether it be college, whether it be a trade environment, whether it be some type of program. So in my experience as a student, I want to be a teacher and a lawyer as well. And one of the things, or one of the barriers that I've encountered through this program is that it seems as though each year, based on the legislature, based on certain decisions by certain government officials, the requirements to become a teacher have made it hard in terms of accessibility. I do not have an issue when it comes to the academic portion of it, but with some of the requirements, there are certain things that I understand that certain requirements, certain things need to be met in order to, you know, achieve certain status within the university as well as within certain programs. But one of the barriers is that for your clinical experience as a teacher, or as a student teacher, I should say, things have to be back-to-back consecutively. And that's hard for somebody that might need some time to recuperate from medical illnesses. There's so many other examples I can point to, not only as a student teacher, that make it hard, but there was a moment this semester where I wanted to be in school. I know I'm going to go to school forever, college forever. I know that wholeheartedly. But there was a dark moment that I had where I had COVID twice. I am fully vaccinated, boosted, everything like that, where I considered to myself, let me just drop out for a little bit and come back. And it was the saddest feeling I had because I want to be a teacher and I want to help children. My question is that there are certain policies that are being created by certain legislators and certain things that happen. What can we do, not just myself, but what can we do to advance measures that promote accessibility within higher education? Because it hasn't helped as of right now for me all the time, and I want to know what can we do to create a more friendly and more accessible New Jersey for students that are in these programs right now.
I would like to address that is very important. There's several things that I think that need to be taken a more in-depth look at the policies of the universities regarding students with disabilities. Not all of the time can students with disabilities take a full load of classes, and because of that, their schedules are more spread out. And so some universities require that you finish within 7 years, but that's not possible for a person with a disability because of their disability takes them away from taking a full load of classes. Therefore, funding for their classes are cut. Taking a look at that is very important. In order for students with disabilities to have, not only to have access to be able to acquire those degrees like teaching, we need to take a look at what those requirements are and adjust them according to their disability, or what the person's accommodation or modification. That's not a hard thing. That's not a hard thing that any university could move the year requirement down so that, that I understand the federal government requires, especially when we're talking about FAFSA, you're required to take at least 12 credits during the year. So what could schools do? They have money. I know they will take your money anytime you want to give it to them. So why not allow students to take a lower number of classes when they've registered with the Office of Disability Services and have access to those protections or those services in order to spread out their time, because as I mentioned earlier, some students take longer to complete their degrees because they cannot successfully go through the 12 credit requirement that most federal programs require.
Just like to add one more thing, and I apologize for this, but I do hope that the network and other initiatives that may be created after this conversation looks into. I think it's great that you talked about just this, answering my question about the university level, and that's very important. I would hope that we also look at certain policies that have been codified into law or regulations that, quite frankly, some of these things haven't always considered people with disabilities. There's no framework for people who have who need a waiver for certain things or exceptions. So I would hope that we could look at universities as well as governmental practices and regulations that unfortunately has caused myself as well as potentially future people like some of my clients that I serve who want to go into university but are really scared and maybe not end up doing so, because, and by the way, that's also a loss in investment if you really think about it, because you give money to university, because of these barriers, it's worth investing in people with disabilities. So thank you.
Do I see another question here?
Hi, my name is Jeremiah Laporte. Just to give my visual description, I am wearing a black outlined outfit with a blue and white shirt. I have black hair and I am an indigenous Afro-Latino. As a person whose specialty is not in this area, I do have a brother who lives with autism, so I am just as curious as anyone can be. So I just have two questions. My first question is, and I'm sorry if I butcher your names, Professor Robles and Bacino. In your opinion as professors, would you say understanding the perspective of people who live with disabilities, or more so being exposed to those perspectives in a personal capacity, allows one to be more transformative or progressive when in environments of which students with disabilities are in, specifically educational environments like college? That goes for both staff and student peers. That goes for staff and both student peers.
Okay, right now I'm teaching Deaf in Society, and I always expose the students as well as the staff. I give brochures that's related to DDHH, which is the Division of the Deaf and Hard of Hearing on the state level, and they have a great partnership with us, and they serve the state of New Jersey for the deaf and hard of hearing population. And so I teach the ADA from Title 1 through 5. I cover all that, as well as Section 504 of the Rehab Act, as well as IDEA relating to the educational level. and we get into how it pertains to the deaf, and many are not aware about this. And some are not aware about this, of how different disabilities are covered by this as well. So I do cover this. There are also those that are hearing that have disabilities and need awareness. So I show some videos about visual aids. And some are visual learners. And so that's really, really important. And then I also introduce them to my department staff about visual aids, instructions, as well as using videos. And so it's really, really important to have those things. And I provide that in brochures. And then there's the SPAN network, if you're not aware about this. They have a deaf mentorship program. And then they provide assistance to children and families. And then I encourage my students and staff to apply for the newsletter and to get subscriptions. And I do encourage my staff through email to join their listing. And they serve everyone in the state of New Jersey. And so these are some of the things and resources that I share with my staff, with my students, but it's a daily practice.
Thank you for that question. I just want to point out really briefly that, when we're talking about students with disabilities, you said you're Afro-Latino. One of the populations we rarely talk about are, people who are Latino, African-American, marginalized communities with disabilities. And, the fact that when they get to school, sometimes they have a different reception, and sometimes they're not, they don't feel welcome. Sometimes they have a lot of other issues that we don't talk generally when we speak about people with disabilities that are not, within those communities. I think it's important as a professor, I try to make all my students feel welcome, right? So, I have this universal class where I think of my students not necessarily as, even if they have disabilities, I'm like, well, what do you need to learn, right? So I use different methodology in my class. I bring in speakers with disabilities, all the time. But I also, encourage them to view movies about disabilities, right? So we have this Awaken Cinema project where students have to view things like Murderball, which is, this great documentary, but, they have to view Crip Camp, and they have to discuss it, and we talk about it in class. And also when we do exams, or at least when I do exams, I really tell my students, we're going to be talking about this in our exams. I try to guide them as best as I can. I don't want to give them all the answers. But, as a professor, I don't see the need to, stick it to the student. I don't see the need to, make it difficult for them, to, trick them often, which some professors do. And then in terms of accommodations, I've had many students with disabilities come into my class. Obviously, a lot of them are invisible disabilities. So when they come up to me, they say, hey, I need this or that or whatever, they bring me their paper, everything looks good. We give them an accommodation, whether it's for an exam or for a reading or for alternate text or whatever it is. I think often some professors don't want to do that because, especially with invisible disabilities, right? They think that someone's trying to game the system, right? And it's really not their place as professors to say, hey, you're gaming the system, because they don't really know what this person's disability is. And that's problematic in a lot of ways, especially with people who are on the spectrum, as an example, or individuals who, may have learning disabilities. So, when we talk about people feeling stigmatized, this is where it comes from. Sometimes it comes from our professors, So I think it's important as professors, as educators, to really, have a universal class, to really think about giving students different ways of learning, and being open to meeting with them or assisting them. I don't think an educator loses anything by being a kind person, and I think we're missing that in our schools. We've come to the point where we feel everyone has to compete just to get ahead, and you know, with our particular students with disabilities, I don't think that we need to do that. So.
Go ahead, Hillary.
I'm sorry. I just came up with an idea that you might have already come up with, so I apologize if you have. But perhaps to piggyback off of what you just said, it might be a good idea to add the teaching style of the professor for each class into the course guide. So for some students who learn better using with certain methodologies, maybe if it's a class more interactive versus a lecture format, some students can select those classes if that's what if that's how they learn best. So that might be just an option or something to think about to incorporate that into the course registration materials.
Thank you. I know Professor Bashino would like to add something too.
I think all classes, modern languages. I think one of the best classes that the students could interact with each other as groups while learning a new language. I think that's really important, and they can feel comfortable with each other. I do teach American Sign Language. Where exactly do you live? Where's your hometown? Describe your upbringing, your parents. And the students really feel engaged because they're expressing themselves, their identity, their life, their hobbies, as opposed to me providing a lecture. And they're not learning in that kind of environment. And so it's more expressive. So I encourage those in modern language to learn from each other as groups and also to express themselves and their backgrounds.
Thank you. So we're about nearing the end of our program. I want to turn it over to Brittany really quick, who's going to talk about these two pieces of, or the single piece of legislation that was mentioned before, so everyone can note it down if you'd like.
Able to research and find those numbers. The number is S285. Again, that's S285 and A1701. A1701. And thank you for bringing those up.
Yeah, so these bills would establish the permanent unit in the Office of Emergency Management to address access and functional needs of residents related to disasters and emergencies. We've noted this down, and we'll make sure to include it in the email as follow-up. Also, another point I'd like to mention is in this program, we've got another piece of legislation in here. It's, whoops, don't mind me. Let's see. So we've got Bill A787. There's currently not a Senate version of it. But what this bill would do, it would direct the Secretary of Higher Ed to develop a career and education guide for post-secondary students with disabilities. The Office of the Secretary of Higher Ed would guide and develop and make this publicly available on its website. The following page includes language directly from the bill. And we've included the link too so that you can check it out for yourselves, but we thought this was another area of interest that might help progress this further. So before we weren't able to get to Dr. Tamika Quick's remarks, and there's some stuff in here that she sent over that's really important. Dr. Quick is going to be one of the pivotal members leading this network moving forward. And so I want to read a little bit of her remarks for us, and then I'll leave you with some closing words. So Dr. Quick says, "My pronouns are she, her, hers. To be more inclusive of our visually impaired audience members, I would like to provide a visual representation of myself. I'm a Black and Latina 41-year-old 5-foot woman with a short blonde-haired bob haircut, wearing a black dress, and I am sitting at a white desk with my laptop in my home in Passaic, New Jersey. Over the last 2 years, it's been my pleasure to serve as inaugural Executive Director of the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. This office that was established here at Kane in the fall of 2020, thanks to the great leadership of our president, Dr. Epaulet. So on behalf of the university, I want to welcome and thank you all for joining today's discussion. I would be remiss if I didn't take time to thank the program coordinators for the opportunity to participate in today's program. It's truly an honor and privilege to be with you here today. When I was asked if I could provide welcoming remarks, I asked the program planners 2 questions. The first question I asked was, what is the purpose and the goal of the program? Ms. Siobhan Williams, one of the program planners, shared, the discussion will focus on New Jersey colleges and universities and how to make them more accessible to those living with disabilities. The call to action for this roundtable will be to create the Higher Education Accessibility Network, a collaborative group that will work on making higher education more accessible for New Jersey colleges and universities. After learning the overall goal and outcome of building an accessibility network, I took time to commend and praise the students for thinking, committing, and working on something that is so desperately needed and long overdue. Developing this higher education accessibility network can move us in the direction where one day accommodations are no longer an afterthought, but the opportunity to readily provide resources to those that need them without them having to ask for the things that they need to live their everyday lives. I thank Nicole Schrouder, a great colleague, scholar, and advocate for accessibility, who currently serves as one of our Equities in Action Fellows here at Kane, for challenging me to consider this idea and facilitate our work in this direction. Today's roundtable conversation moves us